I want to bring in Secret Service Special Agent in Charge, Nick Steen. He oversaw Carter's Secret Service detail from 2017 until 2019. And Nick, it's so good to have you with us. And I have to ask you, what was it like protecting the former president?
When I took over President Carter's detail, he was already in his early 90s, so it was a very different form of protection. Obviously, everybody knows the role of the Secret Service as far as protecting from threats, but there's also when someone's elderly and has that age, there's that aspect of it, the medical component. So, but in addition to that, he was still very active. I mean, we still did foreign travel. He did a lot of fishing and hunting trips. He went on Habitat for Humanity builds. So he was a very active man in his early 90s. So that also added to that element of danger because, being active, it wasn't that he was just sitting at home and we were protecting him in a chair, but we were wading through rivers and going on boats in the Gulf of Mexico. It was just, it was in many ways kind of surreal that he was able to do that and continue to do that well into his 90s.
What a wonderful experience. And I know you said that being with him was like walking through history. What do you mean?
It was, as a Secret Service agent, a lot of times when you're doing a protective mission, it's the now. I was on duty during September 11th and a lot of the other events before and after that where history's being made. You don't really reflect on it being history. It's just what's happening right then. But with him, a lot of our time together was him in reflection. We'd be driving around the farmlands around Plains, Georgia, and we'd have talks about him growing up and being a farmer and what farming is in the area. I learned a lot about farming from him. But I was essentially walking and living with history in every conversation I had with him. He was still doing things. I remember there was still there were some issues with North Korea when President Trump took over as he was starting to start diplomatic relations, and President Carter wanted to go to North Korea to help facilitate that. And so, but in many ways, just every day with him was kind of like a history lesson, and he was very kind to always sit and talk and tell us about his experiences, primarily before he was president.
And Nick, not just protecting him and walking through history, you also went to Sunday school with him, didn't you?
Pretty much every Sunday, unless there was some reason we were out of town. He was, during my time there, he was teaching Sunday schools on Sunday there at Maranatha Baptist in Plains. So every Saturday night we would try to get him home, or he would be home to prepare his lesson for the next day, and then we would have to coordinate a very large gathering every Sunday. People would come from literally all over the world every Sunday to hear him give his Sunday school lesson.
We are watching the procession of the 39th president set to arrive on Capitol Hill. You can see a number of the dignitaries and lawmakers waiting there to begin this ceremony. We're speaking with Nick Steen, the special agent in charge. And Nick, I understand you're from Georgia, but you learned more about peanuts from Jimmy Carter than anybody else.
I did. He'd often want to go in the afternoons to drive. We had a farm truck that we'd use as his vehicle, and he would ride in the truck and point out things. He'd often get out and walk through the fields, and he wasn't actually the farmer in the fields at the time. He would lease out his land, but it was funny. He knew every stage of, if we rode by the crop, he could tell if it needed more water, or he'd pull up a thing and show us the peanuts underneath growing into the ground. So he was just, he never forgot his roots there and being a farmer from South Georgia and growing up and learning all about that. And he didn't forget any of it. And that period between when he was in the Navy and when he ran for a government position with the state of Georgia, he was a farmer through and through, and he knew the business very well.
And Nick, I know that Secret Service agents, of course, are circumspect about their dealings with presidents, but you also had a front row seat to his relationship with his wife of 77 years, Rosalynn Carter. What did you witness?
They had a special relationship. I mean, obviously they were married 77 years, and they were a husband and wife. Without getting into detail, they would have their discussions in the back of our limousine sometimes as we were transporting him from one location to another, and sometimes they'd be angry with each other, but you'd look back and they'd be holding hands. So they just really had a very unique relationship, and it was symbiotic. We used to often say if one of them was down, if we had one in the hospital, the other one would suddenly be full of energy and healthy. And so they just kind of fed off each other in that way. And really, you could tell there was a lot of love there between them.
Well, Nick, the special agent in charge, for 2 years of former President Jimmy Carter. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I guess that's one of the lessons. If you're going to argue, hold hands at least while you're doing it. That's the that's a secret to a long marriage, huh?
It keeps somebody finding another use for their hand.
No doubt. I have to say we're also joined by Terry Adamson, a close friend of the Carters and his personal attorney. And Terry, thank you so much for staying with us as we watch this incredible procession down Pennsylvania Avenue from the U.S. Navy Memorial. I mean, just look at really this incredible group of dignitaries and the family as they proceed to the U.S. Capitol. And Terry, I know you did so much work with the Carter Center. What do you think is the legacy?
Well, the center itself is an incredible legacy. They put their heart and soul in it. I'm sure the original dreams of it were ambitious, but it has done so much more than most of us that were a part of that for so long did. What it does in health, what it does in peace, mental health. One of Mrs. Carter's favorite subjects since she was First Lady of Georgia. It is just an incredible institution, and it has done more through the leadership of the Carters. And it will continue to do more under the leadership of its board, and is chaired by Jason Carter, and talking about earlier. And it takes places. It works on tropical diseases that are neglected, and for the poorest and the most deprived around the world. And it's just amazing. It has over 3,000 employees, a couple hundred in Atlanta. Most are in Africa or in the Americas. And they've worked on so many different diseases. You all heard about them, I think, and talked about them. But the impact of those is just demonstrably large, and it's the human misery that is avoided because of that work. And it was led and created by Rosalind and Jimmy, and it's an amazing institution. They're also working on peace. They got very involved in the American elections this year. And it's going to be a wonderful, and it has been, and always has been, because it's so wonderful that the world and the American people have seen the Carters operate for 43 years since he was president, and they've got to know him pretty well. And they learned his principles, his integrity, his honor, his belief in human rights, and his belief in justice. And I do think, I'm a firm believer through the long lens of history, that ratification of what he is, it means a lot to how people will ultimately and are today interpreting his presidency.
It's an excellent point, Terry. And Adamson, thank you. Douglas?
Well, it is an excellent point. And, we talk about Jimmy Carter as a farmer, but there's a novelist, Wallace Stegner, wrote a book talked about the geography of hope. There's no disassociating Jimmy Carter from Georgia. It wasn't just, I'm a farmer. It was about scientific farming. He learned about soil conservation. He learned about tree planting. He learned he created his own pond and its stock. I mean, he really was incredible at that. And just down the road, Georgia had an agricultural way station where he learned scientific farming principles. And then the Carter Center hired Dr. Norman Borlaug, the Nobel Prize winner of the Green Revolution. And Carter and Borlaug went all over the world trying to find ways to create new hybrid corn so a windstorm or a typhoon didn't kill your crops, so people would have food year round. Carter did a lot of that. It wasn't just eradication of guinea worm or river blindness. It was how to do sustainable agriculture on a global way. What is a bigger issue than that? Creating food for countries in need.